So welcome to all of our global attendees to this WAPOR webinar. I'm Chase Harrison, the chair of the WAPOR Education Committee. We have an international group with us, but the focus of this is in newly emerging technologies, CATI and SMS, but especially in Sub-Saharan Africa and other things that might work in other lower income contexts and other places where resources are just still developing. And we're just so delighted to have a group of experts with us. Let me just say a little bit as part of WAPOR being a global, multinational, multicultural, multilingual organization, is that we have a new feature on this. And Ksenia will be posting some instructions into the chat, but we have captions now available in about 39 different languages and localizations. And if you look on the lower bar, you will see a show captions, and within some options there, you can choose the language or alphabet of your choice among the ones that we were able to license. And so I really hope this can open things up to discussion, and simply to add that we're ready to take questions in English or French when we get to the discussion. I just want to really thank, first of all, Ali Nguesson, who is a member of our education committee, who really took the lead on organizing this. And Ali will be here to help moderate and handle questions. I also want to introduce the interim president of our new WAPOR Sub-Saharan Africa chapter, Angela Ambito, who is based in Nairobi, and we'll be talking a little bit about some of the relevance of this and our new chapter, and before we move to our guests. Angela?
Thank you, Chase, and good evening, everyone from Nairobi. It's quite a privilege to be here. Very excited to see that names that I know and a brand that I know, GeoPol, will be presenting today. They do a lot in Sub-Saharan Africa, using newer methods to collect data, like many of us are doing. But I wanted to take this opportunity just to share with you, the exciting progress that we have made as a regional chapter, as WAPOR SSA standing for what you see there on your screen, which is Sub-Saharan Africa. We are, shy of 2 years since we launched in Dubai in 2022 as a regional chapter, and I've had some very exciting, milestones since our launch, our very exciting launch. I think one of the first things that would be interesting, perhaps, for the participants to know is that WAPOR SSA is open to all members to join as an association. As you know, Africa is being touted as the next big and best frontier, although it's been happening for years. But I think with what GeoPol will be showing you today, and what many of us know and see, is that this is indeed coming to fore. And so hot on the heels of realizing the potential that our continent holds, we in line with what we felt would be proper with our mother association, WAPOR Global, and other older regional associations, we attempted to hold a regional conference at the beginning of this year in April. And suffices to add, it was actually quite a very successful conference. Not only did we have more than 50 presentations and papers, presented at this conference by various, participants, both from academia to practitioner side, both from Kenya to various other parts of the continent and outside Africa. We had people coming in from the global north. We had people from America, the UK. We had people from Asia as well. So it was a melting pot of very many, brilliant ideas, just discussing what it is that we felt would data means, research means for sustainable development in Africa. And so we had a lot of exciting discussion. We have just completed the draft of our ebook, or indeed the report on the conference, which will be available on both the WAPOR Global website and our website. And we, hope that you will get an opportunity to see just the kind of discussions that we had. Some were very heated. We are very expressive people in Africa. Some were very deep, but many of them, if not all of them, were very critical, from AI and what it means to us today in terms of public opinion research to, things that delved on gender and the gender dynamics. So this is really where we have reached now as WAPOR SSA in terms of at least attaining one milestone and having a conference that was really a big win for us. And from there, we were able to accrue about 100 new members who are now members of WAPOR SSA. So if you were to join, you'd be joining a family of 100 and becoming 101 and 102 and thereon. What are some of the exciting things that we have, coming up for us? There are many things happening in Africa. If any of you have taken an opportunity to be online, then you know that where John and I are seated today, which is Nairobi, is perhaps one of the hot topics in the continent. Our Generation Z decided out of their own accord through an organic social movement that was stemming off the frustrations of high cost of living and a very unpopular finance bill, decided to demonstrate and understand that the power truly belongs to them, particularly as young people. And as of today, we have a finance bill that they had demanded be rejected, and the president has, we believe, listened and put the finance bill on hold. I say this because culminating to this period, the populace, the young people, Generation Z, policymakers and government were informed about the perceptions of, the finance bill and what the public felt about the finance bill by public opinion research companies. And so the church and various, key stakeholders have been quoting figures that come from public opinion research. And John, I don't want to steal your thunder, but indeed it was the InfoTrack poll that actually mentioned that 85% of Kenyans were against the finance bill. And that's a number that has been touted in very many fora across the country. Today, it's a big win, because we can see the intersection between public opinion research, democracy, and good governance, and how it can actually positively influence and inform policy making if our policymakers listen. And, stemming from that, we are planning a cost of living conference, a webinar, which will bring together and will be a melting pot of different experts and opinion shapers and leaders who have, experience in what this cost of living issue that is plaguing, perhaps not just us, is probably plaguing Chase, where he's sitting in Harvard, although we don't believe it where we sit here. It's probably plaguing Xenia, wherever she is sitting in Austria. It's plaguing Ali in Cote d'Ivoire. And it's plaguing all of us, wherever we may be, Adiola, who's sitting in Nigeria, etc. And we feel that that is a topic that is really very, relevant to us in Africa today. So Sub-Saharan Africa will be having that, and we'll work very closely with the Education Committee of WAPOR Global to ensure that everybody has access to that. We have also planned a webinar to help us understand the upcoming elections in Ghana. And so one of our colleagues, Irenaeus Gundona, is going to be presenting a paper on how elections can be informed by public opinion research, and how campaigns can borrow from data to better jig their campaign strategies and manifestos. So that too will be an interesting one. But over and above that, we are also looking forward to having more methodological kind of webinars where we'll be discussing some of the things that GeoPol has prepared for you today, which are the new ways that we are collecting data in Sub-Saharan Africa, and indeed the challenges that we have to deal with in terms of multicultural and the regional challenges that we have to deal with in this region that may be different from yours. I don't want to say much more. Please go to our website, WAPOR SSA. We will put the link on the chat box. We will also put a link to a video that we did as WAPOR SSA. I was interviewed on the cost of living. And if you want to see that video and understand what it means for us as Kenya, this was an interview done early in the year, just before we had the conference, then you can actually get that as well. We have other videos that we have done that you would also be able to see, and documents. GeoPol, who is going to be presenting today, is not a stranger to Nairobi and the public opinion research sector, but they're also not a stranger to market research as a whole. John Murunga, who's going to be a co-presenter, is actually the chair of our Market Research Association of Kenya. And so he's a friend and is a colleague, and I'm sure that the information that you're going to receive from them will be very representative of what all of us in terms of the sector in the region are going through or experiencing with regards to data collection methods, particularly with respect to computer-assisted telephone interviews using both mobile, fixed line is almost dead here, and also SMS surveys. So, when things have come down, I will again say karibu to Nairobi. But we welcome you very much to, work with us, collaborate with us as WAPOR SSA, to collaborate with us as individual research agencies, academicians and practitioners in the region, because the one thing that we do understand is our people. Thank you very much. And I wish us a very interesting webinar.
Angela, thank you so very much for this introduction. I will just briefly introduce our speakers. John Murunga, who joins us from Nairobi, is the Regional Director of GeoPol. And Charles Lau, who is joining us from the US, but does a lot of work in Sub-Saharan Africa, is the chief methodologist at GeoPol. And they're going to be talking about CATI and SMS surveys in Sub-Saharan Africa. So John, please take it away.
Thank you, Chess, and thank you also, Angela, for the introduction. And happy to share our experiences with remote data collection for CATI and SMS surveys in Sub-Saharan Africa. As Angela mentioned, we are going through a bit of a challenge in Nairobi. So if you happen to hear any background noises of tear gas canisters going off or bullets, just understand it's because there are riots currently in Nairobi. So we've ordered our presentation as seen in the screen. So we'll go through the introduction of CATI and SMS for probably those who have not interacted with those methodologies. We'll talk about some of the use cases for the two methodologies. We'll look at some of the challenges and solutions for both CATI and SMS, and then open up the discussion for a Q&A. I know we've written there for 5 minutes, but I know it will be slightly shorter than that because of time. I'll kick off with an overall introduction to GeoPol. Just for those who are not aware of GeoPol, we are a technology-driven research organization that collects high quality, timely data at scale. And we utilize multiple methodologies to do this. Remotely, we utilize CATI, mobile web and mobile SMS, and as well as mobile application. And then we're also able to utilize face-to-face surveys to support our work. We are headquartered in the US, and we have our largest regional office in Nairobi. Most of our work is done in emerging markets or mid-low income countries. We support clients both in the international development sector space as well as commercial clients. But for the purpose of this presentation, we've listed there a couple of clients that you're probably familiar with. In terms of just quick numbers for the work that we have done, annually we do about 4.5 million interviews. We've done projects in 144 countries. We've done 8,414 distinct country projects as at the time when we put together this presentation. We do have a network of global call centers across different countries of operation. We've done surveys in 113 languages. I actually did note when we were being told to show the captions that we are missing Swahili in there. So WAPOR team, please do include Swahili in the caption section for our next webinar. And then we have over 10,000 trained enumerators or interviewers that we work with, and we have a database of about 300 million mobile subscribers that allows us to be able to do the work that we do remotely. Three quick illustrative projects that we have done in the recent past. People's Climate Poll, UNDP, 74,000 interviews in 77 countries. This is a study that soon the report will be made public. We've supported the World Food Program with food security monitoring. We've done so far over a couple of years, 1.9 million CAT interviews in 44 countries. And then last year, we partnered with the Africa Development Bank to do face-to-face surveys in a total of 48 countries in the continent. GeoPol did half of that, 27. And then another agency did the other half, and we did that in about 4 months. So getting into the substance of our presentation today, we'll kick off by just introducing CATI and SMS to give you an overview of what these methodologies are, what exactly they entail, and some pros and cons for those two methodologies. So CATI surveys basically are interviewer-administered phone interviews that are done by trained enumerators. This can be done from a permanent or a temporary call center. Of course, there are QC procedures that are put in place to ensure that, from the design of the project all the way to the data collection itself, work is done properly. Usually, again, this is subject to practitioners in the space. Interviews would range between 15 to 30 minutes. The call centers can be physical in one place, or they can be virtual, as we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then mobile phones are used whenever we are executing CATI interviews. So what are some of the pros and cons of CATI surveys? Some advantages of CATI surveys is that it doesn't require literacy. So you say compared to mobile SMS, where you would need the respondents at least to be able to read and write. Makes different question types possible when you're administering CATI interviews. Interviews can tailor surveys and even set appointments for respondents to take surveys at a later time. Interviewers are able to interact with the respondents and therefore allow the interviewer to probe whenever there is need for that. And then compared to other remote modes, you're able to administer slightly longer questionnaires, as we shall see when we look at, for instance, mobile SMS. Looking at some of the disadvantages of CATI as a methodology, one is it can be slightly more expensive compared to IVR, SMS, and web. But of course, this depends on many factors, including sample size, number of interviews that need to be done, who exactly you need to interview, etc. We also have a number of interview effects that could affect the way the data has been collected. It can be a challenge to execute CATI survey when you're doing a survey that has sensitive topics. And then Of course, when you're doing CATI interviews, a respondent needs to pick the phone and be able to text the survey. So that, and again, is another drawback for that approach. And then whenever you need to, for instance, show visual content, as in the case where, for instance, you're doing a face-to-face survey and you need to show a respondent a show card, or you need to show an image or show a video, that's not possible via CATI as a methodology. Looking at mobile SMS, so how does it actually work? So basically, the way SMS works is a survey is created, and that is through a system. So this could be a GeoPol system, it could be a system that is hosted by another agency. Then the survey is sent to respondents or a contact list. The respondent received the SMS on their phone, the question as an SMS at no cost. They respond to the SMS back. And then the next question goes to the respondent. All this is iterated in an automated fashion, depending on what question the respondent is answering. And then that iteration happens until the survey is completed. Once the survey is completed, the respondent is provided for an incentive. This could be in the form of airtime, or it could be in the form of mobile money, depending on how the survey is designed. And then that survey is closed at that point. Data is received real time as the survey is ongoing. So whether the respondent completes the full interview or not, that data is received in the back end. And the agency that is doing the interviews is able to look through the data and get to see the responses as they're coming in. So SMS stands for short message service or text message. And this is available for all phone devices. So a respondent is able to take an SMS survey with any type of mobile device, whether it's a basic phone, a feature phone, or a smartphone. The whole process is automated and is self-administered by the respondent. The question that a respondent receives together with the answer responses have a character limitation of 160, meaning that the entire survey experience on the screen of the respondent has to be 160 characters. Multiple messages are possible, but at times that can lead to errors. We, from our experience, have seen SMS surveys ranging up to 20 questions optimally, but of course, this is the experience of people and how they have also conducted surveys in the past. You can see that number stretched from time to time. And then you're also able to administer mobile SMS surveys with multiple languages. So, for instance, in the case of the audience that we have here today, if the survey was being administered, then you would have the choice to pick whatever language was relevant to us. In terms of the pros and cons for mobile SMS surveys, some advantages is rapid to deploy SMS surveys. So for instance, if you're doing a sample of 1,000 respondents, all those respondents can receive the survey at the same time when that is deployed. So data collection is very rapid. People can respond to SMS surveys at their own leisure. So you can receive the survey today at 5 p.m. and respond to it at 10 p.m. in the evening. It's a natural form of communication because we text all the time. So it's easy for the respondents just to reply to the survey at their own convenience. It's less expensive compared to IVR as a methodology and CATI as another remote data collection approach. It's suitable for real-time data. So in the moment type of data, if you want to collect data, for instance, right now on the riots that are happening in Nairobi and get feedback immediately, that is possible. And then potentially we feel that as an approach, it's better when you're executing sensitive topics. Look at some disadvantages of or drawbacks for mobile SMS as an approach. Of course, as an approach, it requires that respondents be able to be literate, so they're able to read and write. Questions must be short. So the surveys that are administered through mobile SMS, like I mentioned, from the character limit for a question, which is 160. And then also the overall total number of questions that the respondent will be asked has to be generally short. You're not able to share any visual or audio content with the respondents as they are taking an SMS survey. If a respondent has a basic phone or a feature phone that have, small screens, it would need, they would require to scroll up to be able to see all the questions. So that can be a challenge from a user experience perspective, and we'll look at that later on in the presentation. The SMS surveys remain on the phone of the respondent. So meaning that if you're, doing an interview on a very sensitive topic, then the respondent would, manually need to delete the mobile SMS if the SMSs, if they do not want that to remain on their phone. And then, it's can be a challenge to verify who is answering or who is responding to the survey, because you depend on the respondent to actually provide you that information. And in cases where, for instance, a respondent is untruthful with the information that they are showing, that can be a challenge in that sense. Now, when we are executing these type of surveys, there are different types of sampling approaches that we can use, and we have enumerated these sampling approaches and listed some of the advantages and disadvantages of the same. I'll quickly run over this. So one, you can administer the surveys using random digital database. Advantages of that, large sample size, easy and inexpensive. Some of the disadvantages to this is inefficient and also can vary with mobile network operation in a particular country. Numbering system typically lacks geography for those who have administered surveys using RDD. Designs are typically limited to stratification by mobile network operator because that is the only sampling parameter that you would have. And then we have also seen lower response rates versus, for instance, recontact surveys in the past. The other sampling approach that can be used would be recontacting surveys, recontacting respondents from a previous survey. The advantages of this is you have higher response rates compared to RDD, lots of data from non-response adjustments. Some of the disadvantages of this is you have a limited sample size because it will be dependent on a survey that was done in the past. And then you also have a lot of drop-off rates from surveys that are done using a database that comes from a survey that was done previously. The third sampling approach that can be utilized is getting a list from a partner or a vendor that you're working with in a particular country. The good thing about this list is that it usually has auxiliary information that can be used for sampling. Some disadvantages of this, it's expensive. Then the sampling approach would be non-probability. The panel conditioning effects as well come in there. And then also coverage error, because basically the sample would be dependent on where the vendor did get his list from. And at times you do not have control over that. The fourth approach or that source that can be used for sampling is mobile network operator sample. These are usually large sample sizes. They may have information that is auxiliary that can be used for sampling. The biggest challenge for this is that it's very hard to reach for most researchers. So as an approach, it can be a bit prohibitive for purpose of sampling when you're utilizing remote data collection. Now let's look at some of the use cases of CATI and SMS survey. So basically we picked a few projects that have been done using these methodologies, both some by GeoPol and some by external organizations, just to showcase how these approaches are useful compared to, for instance, if you were to do a survey via face-to-face, and the advantages that these surveys would bring if, for instance, you were to take that as opposed to utilizing face-to-face as a data collection methodology. So the first one here is the World Bank high-frequency phone survey. So this was done during the COVID-19 pandemic period. The World Bank conducted CATI surveys in 89 countries. These surveys utilize two main sampling frames, so from follow-back surveys and also through RDD. If you look at the scale and the magnitude of this survey and the need that was required at that particular point, and also the context of where the world was at that particular point. These are surveys that would have been very hard to execute face-to-face. But CATI surveys as an approach enabled the World Bank to do this at scale, and also in record time to be able to provide valuable information to help with the pandemic. The second use case that we wanted to share with you is for the World Food Program. So this is a survey that is done internally at GeoPol. We work with the World Food Program in over 30 countries. We collect food monitoring or food security data on a daily basis via CATI. And this data, finds its way into the World Hunger Map that helps organizations that are responding to humanitarian needs, especially for food security, to make decisions on the food insecure populations across multiple countries. This is another example of a survey that would be extremely expensive and difficult to execute using face-to-face surveys, but CATI allows you to poll respondents every day and have that data be available the following day on a dashboard, and allow multiple stakeholders to access the data and use that to make critical informed decisions on how to support food security challenges across multiple countries in the globe. The third use case example that I wanted to share with you is a UNICEF Mix Plus survey. So these are large scale studies that are usually done face-to-face approximately every 5 years. So this particular time, UNICEF did follow-back surveys with the database from the previous done face-to-face surveys across Belize, Georgia, Mongolia, Samoa, Nigeria, and Jamaica. And again, this is another good example of how CATI can allow you to do a survey at scale, utilizing a database from a previously done face-to-face study. The other use case for a CATI survey is a study that GeoPol did in conjunction with the Africa Population and Health Research Center, or APHRC. This was a nationwide public opinions and attitudes towards abortion in Kenya. A nationwide study done targeting persons above 18 years of age. The total sample size was 8,942 respondents. This was done from a GeoPol database of about 8 million respondents. And in there, we were able to do a couple of things. So the overall objectives for this study was to assess the overall opinions on abortion in Kenya, assess the knowledge and attitude towards abortion, to measure the extent of abortion stigma in the country, and also explore the circumstances in which abortion will be made acceptable or allowable by law. So this is another use case example of a very huge study that was done in record time, and in a very inexpensive way that ordinarily, if it would be done face to face across all the 47 countries in the country, it would be near impossible or very expensive to execute in that time frame. Two final case examples. One is for mobile SMS. So GeoPol currently collects media audience measurement data from a panel of about 2,500 respondents on a daily basis to understand their media consumption. So this is data that is utilized by media houses, any person who would like to understand media consumption across the entire country, that is Kenya, and the data is collected every day, and the respondents are polled on their media consumption 24 hours in a day. This is done utilizing mobile SMS and mobile application. Again, another approach that would have been very difficult to execute and pull off using face-to-face as data collection methodology. Lastly, as a final use case, is an SMS survey done in Mexico. This was done for the public health, the government in Mexico. They did a survey by polling close to 1 million respondents. So this survey SMS went out to 982,708 respondents. This is something that you wouldn't ordinarily be able to pull off with a traditional face-to-face data collection approach. Even CATI would be difficult to pull this off. And as you can see there, they received respondents from 56,000 respondents, and they had about 53% response received within 24 hours. So that just shows, a few case examples to showcase how, CATI and SMS as methodologies are very helpful for particular cases, depending on the situation that you are in and the need that you have for a particular survey. I'll pass the mic to my colleague, Charles, who will pick over from me and speak to the next section of our presentation. Over to you, Charles.
Thanks, JP. So I'm going to talk about some methodological challenges and solutions focusing on CATI. I'll focus on 3 of them in particular. Representation, so how well do CATI survey respondents kind of mirror the population we're trying to study? Questionnaire length, how long can CATI surveys be and how long should they be? And then measurement, so what is the quality of data that we collect on CATI? I'll start with representation. So one big threat to representing populations well in CATI is undercoverage, okay? And specifically, people from the target population not having phones. We can't include them in the study via CATI. This graphic might be a little small, but you can kind of get the idea behind the graph. This comes from El-Kasabi and Khan. It's an IJPOR paper, came out last year. It's a quite nice paper. And just to highlight a few of the coverage challenges in different countries. So I highlighted 4 here in red. So the darker bars refer to the people who have their own phone. This is from DHS data. The lighter gray refers to people who don't own their own phone, but they had access to another phone from someone else. And the white bar is people who don't have a phone. So you see down here in Ethiopia, 35% of the population doesn't have access to any phone. Whereas the top 2, South Africa and Mali, most people have access to a phone, but in Mali, it's 24% of the population shares a phone, whereas South Africa is much lower at 9%. So this is a big challenge to representation of people not having phones. One note is that a lot of times when you see coverage statistics, people report the number of subscriptions per 100 people in a country. So the problem, though, is that oftentimes it's over 100, right? So there are 120 mobile phone subscriptions in a country for every 100 people, okay? So that kind of overstates the extent of coverage in the population. So it's much better to use this metric of like % of the population that has access to a phone. Even that is tricky though, because if you share a phone with someone else, it's generally not shared equally, right? So if I share a phone with my wife, my probability of selection is probably not half of hers. It may be different. And then some people who technically, have share a phone may have it, but they may not accept incoming calls from people they don't understand or don't know. Another challenge is non-response, okay? So 4 sources of non-response. I won't go through all of these in detail here, but I'm sure these slides will be made available later. So non-contact is the biggest portion of non-response in CATI surveys. Language barriers also can be a source of non-response. Refusal and also break-off are reasons why response rates are what we see in surveys. And I just wanted to give you a taste of some sample response rates. These response rates come from a recent project JP mentioned, where generally, if you'll get a response rate, this is a CATI random digit dial where we randomly generate phone numbers in a cross-sectional survey. Usually you get, 5 to 15% might be like a rough guide. It depends on a lot of things, but this is just one example that you might see. So the question is, given that coverage and non-response are challenges, how does this affect representation? Okay, so first I'm just going to show a few examples of what we see when we have I'm just calling it a simple design, okay? It's like we call numbers, we don't have any sophisticated survey or sampling design, we just call RDD numbers, and we complete interviews up to a certain point. And what we find is we find a lot of challenges with representation here, okay? So this is an example from 2016. So we see a lot of underrepresentation in Nigeria by women, older people without schooling, and some of these differences are quite large. English speakers are overrepresented. This particular paper, we compared CATI, IVR, and SMS, and CATI did better than IVR or SMS, but it still had some quite big challenges with representation. Here's another example. Ali, I had to bring this in from Cote d'Ivoire because I know you were moderating. So this is one of the first CATI RDD studies that was published. It's from 2013, so 11 years ago. And they compared data from their phone survey to a recent demographic and health survey. And you see similar underrepresentation, right? Women, older people, less educated and rural. And on the right, you see that the challenges with representation kind of affect their survey results too. So the green bars are the DHS. This is like the gold standard face-to-face survey. So you see that the CATI survey respondents are way more likely to, be knowledgeable about HIV testing or have been tested themselves. All right, so here's another example. So those were both from cross-sectional surveys, right? A single point in time survey. This is an example from a follow-back survey where we take people who participated in a face-to-face survey and follow them back over time. We call them back. This is an example from paper from the World Bank Group. Their first round CATI response rates really varied. So from 74% in Malawi to 93% in Uganda. As JP mentioned, the World Bank they do a face-to-face, the model is a face-to-face survey, and then they do multiple rounds of CATI surveys going forward. This project though, this slide, I'm just gonna talk about the first round, the first CATI survey they did. And you can kind of see some similar findings, that education, not being a household head, lower wealth associated with non-response and representation issues. Okay. So it's clear from this that, this research that CATI is not going to just replace face-to-face surveys in Africa in 2024 right now, okay? We're not just going to yank all of our face-to-face work and move to CATI, right? Because of these representation challenges, right? But like JP said, CATI does open up opportunities to do work that would not have been possible via face-to-face. And, it's still a pretty new mode. So we're working on, the field is working on ways to improve it. And I'm going to show a few methods that come from the literature about how we can kind of improve representation of CATI surveys. So there are 10 of them here. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through all 10 in detail. I'm going to just talk about the first 4 where there is more of a research base, okay? So the first is basically when you do a survey where you do a face-to-face survey and then follow up with people via CATI, as JP mentioned, you have a lot of really rich data to use to adjust your CATI data set to make it more representative and accurate. So this is an example. It's from the previous World Bank paper I mentioned. The links for all these papers are in the PowerPoint, so please feel free to look at them after the presentation, and happy to talk more about any paper in more depth. The short story here is that when we look at individual level factors, weighting helps, but it doesn't solve everything, okay? So in general, the vertical bar is like where we want the estimate to be. The green little dot over here is if it's unweighted, then that green little diamond is when you weight it. And you can see that weighting generally moves things towards the vertical bar, but it doesn't fix it. Weighting also increases the variance of our estimates as well. Kind of a partner paper to this used the same data, but they looked at household factors, okay? So can we use weighting to improve representation on the household level? And here, this was much better. This is just an example on household consumption. So bias is reduced a lot. It varies by country and indicator, of course, but it's, it helps quite a bit, okay? So just remember, these methods do require a previous face-to-face survey to use for weighting approaches. If anyone is doing this, I would really recommend these two papers are quite good for if you're a statistician or to pass along to your statistician, because they go into detail about how to actually do these weighting adjustments. Second method is referrals, okay? So Glazerman et al. Have a nice paper where they use an RDD survey in Kenya. And they found in previous surveys that women were underrepresented in phone surveys. So they said, well, why don't we randomize? If a man answers, let's randomize half of them. And we say, hey, can you pass the phone to a female respondent in the household to do the survey? So the numbers are here. Most men who were asked agreed to do it. About half of the time there was no woman available to pass the phone to. The other half, it kind of varies, but basically in about 263 completes came from women who were referred from a man who picked up, okay? And they show this improved representation by a lot of different aspects. It does cost more money, but it's a promising method. Third method is a quota-based design. So this method is used quite frequently in the CATI world in Africa and other regions. I should say for those from higher income countries, like where quota designs are oftentimes frowned upon, this is a probability-based design, okay? It's not like just fill up the quota buckets and walk away. It's a probability-based design. There's like some papers out there that kind of talk about the statistical background behind this. This is a really interesting paper, though. I had to pull it in from Myanmar, so it's not Africa-based, but we chose the Myanmar because it's a really nice, thorough paper, and they walk through all the sampling approaches and the weighting formulas, et cetera. What they did is they set quotas. They looked at the population distribution, and they said, okay, we want to have a certain sample size, and based on the population, we'd like X% of the sample to be from these locations and genders to mirror the overall population distribution. In a lot of cases, respondents answered, and they said they were part of a quota that might be closed, and those people the survey was ended for them. They were ineligible. So by this method, it's a probability-based method where the end result was a distribution of the population that looked quite similar to the face-to-face. And after they applied weights, CATI does quite well in matching the face-to-face survey. CATI, Myanmar is also similar to many countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. Myanmar has a lot of remote areas or challenges with accessibility, and CATI reached about 310 out of 330 townships in the country. Fourth is calling protocols. So, there's not a lot in our control when we do a CATI survey, but one thing that is in our control is how many times do we call and how many times and at different days and times, okay? So IPA, Innovations for Poverty Action, has this paper out here that's also a really nice example of showing how these methods can work. And basically, one method is calling more. So we can just increase the call attempts. And they find that it works, but it's very inconsistent, right? So it's in Ghana and Uganda, calling more people helps, right? We're bringing in people with lower education And these are the people that are frequently missing from CATI surveys, right? So in these two countries, it's actually good to call more because we're balancing the sample a little bit more to be more representative. But in Rwanda, it was the reverse. So the more they called, the more educated the sample became. All right. So this highlights the importance in your surveys of, tracking these things on your surveys and looking at number of call attempts. It's very context and study specific. Rescheduling is another kind of method. Like if we call someone and we make sure that we get an appointment back, does it work? They found that it doesn't really work that well. People who reschedule are more like the typical people that respond to phone surveys, and it doesn't really help reduce underrepresentation. Other methods are here, so in the interest of time, I won't go over those. I would highlight the importance of great interviewer training as something that's not talked a lot about, but is probably one of the most important things here to mention. I'll go very briefly through the CATI questionnaire length. So how long can a questionnaire should be and how long should a CATI questionnaire be? Okay, here you're going to see lots of opinions, but not a lot of evidence. Okay, so the conclusion of this is that we need a lot more research. Okay, but what do we know? Okay, we find that people in many sub-Saharan African countries will, if they agree to do the survey and they get through the first few questions, they will stay on the phone even for very long surveys. This is in some research we did with our partners Frame to look at break-off in Kenya and Nigeria. Break-off rates vary, but most of the break-off is early in the questionnaire, and it's not really associated with many responding characteristics except education. Another project in Malawi, this is also a nice paper, came out a few months ago on Malawi. They randomized people into a 10, 20, and 30-minute questionnaire, and they found that the cooperation and completion rates are very high and pretty much the same, okay? So the conclusion here, and these are just based on 2 studies and other, experience, is that people generally will stay on the phone. Now the question is this a good idea? Okay, so lest, everyone's clients are going to go off and say, hey, we found this with the webinar, we can do an hour phone survey. Now, proceed with caution, okay? One paper here found that when you ask complicated recall questions about food later in the questionnaire, people underreport food consumption, sometimes by a lot, okay? By 8 to 40%, okay, depending on the outcome, okay? So this paper says, watch out, people, especially for complex things. However, another one found that, when they asked questions about parental survival, the questionnaire length did not affect data quality for the questions at the end. All right. So one suggestion here from one paper, you can look at it afterwards, I won't spend much time on this, is that asking earlier, like more interesting topical questions earlier on is helpful for reducing break-off for long surveys, okay? So CATI questionnaires can be long. There's some evidence that, that you get good data quality for simple surveys, but we need a lot more research. So this is my plug, I can't resist. Like, please embed experiments, please publish this. We need a lot more work on this area. I'm going to go through this very quickly. So reliability. So there's one paper kind of assessed reliability of CATI surveys over time. They found pretty good reliability for demographics, alcohol, tobacco, some other health indicators. They found not good reliability for very complex questions. Okay, this is a question on physical activity. It's very long, okay? This paper shows that including long questions like this with like complicated, let me define physical activity for you and describe it all, maybe not the best in a CATI survey. Another paper looks at a face-to-face survey, then they call them up with CATI, and they looked at the reliability of data in the CATI survey relative to the face-to-face, and they found quite good concordance, quite good reliability. So again, they found lower reliability for physical activity was one thing that played out. Physical activity is really hard to measure in any survey from a self-report. So that suggests that it's important to be careful about how we measure complex things in CATI surveys. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to JP to go through challenges and solutions with SMS. Over to you, JP.
Thank you, Charles. So I'll walk you through a couple of what we'll actually just call your toolkit. So things you need to know as you're executing SMS surveys. So items that you need to keep in mind as you're executing SMS surveys. And all this is linked up to a lot of the things that we've already discussed at the beginning of the presentation. So the first bit that we want to look at is the SMS questionnaire design. So some things that you need to keep in mind is that when you're designing an SMS survey, within the context of the question, you also need to include the survey responses, and all that goes out in one SMS. As you can see there on the side, there's an example of a question in SMS that looks at, the question is asking how much influence would you say the United States has on Peruvian economy? 1, a lot, 2, some, 3, little, 4, none. So all that needs to be in one text. Secondly is the issue of character limit. And the character limit for mobile SMS is a function of how SMS are designed in general. So this needs to be 160 characters, and the 160 character count also counts spaces, and at times special characters can take up 2 or more spaces when you're designing the survey. So there's something to keep in mind. The other thing is around response options. So they can be embedded in the question or can be listed separately. But be sure to make sure that you clearly identify the responses. In terms of acceptable responses, when you're doing SMS surveys, you can have numbers as responses, or numeric values being given as responses. You may also have respondents actually type in text back, but at times if you linked the text to basically be the trigger to the next question, it can produce error. So there's something that you need to keep in mind. You can also include section headers in an SMS survey, and a preamble to a next part of the question as you're designing the survey. So and as an example, and you'll see that on the presentation, you can actually have an instruction that says something like the next set of questions are about voting, press 1 to continue. Again, to allow you to play around with the issue of character limits and how the SMS survey is designed. Lastly, when you're designing an SMS survey and it has multiple select questions, you cannot have more than 9 responses for a multiple response question. And this is because when a respondent is reverting back, and say, for instance, you had 11 response options, then the system will not be able to know when the respondent types 11 if that was 1, or actually it was actually 11. So because of that, you can only have 9 respondents on a maximum for multiple select question. However, I've also seen from experience that respondents at times may have challenges in answering a multiple select question. And then also we've seen the tendency of respondents to answer multiple select questions more as a single response question. So that is just something that you need to keep in mind, because within an SMS survey, you're not able to probe a respondent given this is a self-completed survey. Second thing that you need to look at is just a reminder on user experience. So it is important when you're designing SMS surveys that you actually are able to think of the user or the person who will be answering the SMS and keep them in mind. And you can do this by you having the gadgets within your office, or actually testing this with real respondents and seeing how they're able to see the questions on the screen. So that is something that it's important for you to look out for when you're designing SMS surveys. The other thing is to keep in mind is the language selector. As we mentioned, you are able to run SMS surveys in multiple languages. But where you place the opportunity for the respondent to choose the language that they would like the survey to be taken is important. So in this particular case, we are mentioning that it comes just after the introduction, but before the consent, so that by the time the respondent is consenting to take the survey, then they would be choosing the appropriate language that they're comfortable with before they proceed for the next section of the survey. But the language that you started the survey with would be the general language that is utilized in a particular country. The next bit that is important to keep in mind is order effects that come in when you're administering SMS surveys, and evidence is there that shows that the way respondents see, for instance, answer options in a survey would affect their responses. So it is important, for instance, when you're designing your surveys to include rotation aspects within the survey or randomization of options, to ensure that each option has an equal opportunity of being seen as a first response from a survey. Other than that, we have a few other additional survey tips that you need to keep in mind. So locally test the survey with actual respondents before you actually kick off the survey. Avoid embedding response options within the question of the SMS survey itself. If you are having a longer survey, consider breaking it into chunks. And of course, when you do that and you're sampling the same pool of respondents, you need to keep in mind attrition rates, so in the overall design of the survey. And then when you're having numeric questions, you can consider using categories instead of exact numeric responses, just to ensure that respondents are giving you the right information and there are no challenges when they're responding to feedback using SMS surveys. Next items, or just the final thing on SMS survey, is around survey implementation. So some tips. One is that when you're administering SMS survey, it's important to think about the channel. So basically the route via which you'll be utilizing or you'll be deploying SMS survey. So you having the system is one aspect, but you having partnerships or network connectivity with mobile network operators in a particular country is important, and you need to figure that out first before you deploy a SMS survey. Then secondly, in certain countries, there are regulations around mobile network operator approval of the type of survey that runs on their network. So that is something that you need to keep in mind. There are countries, for instance, like Uganda, Ethiopia, etc., where the mobile network operator has to see the survey in totality and review it before you're able to deploy. So just something to keep in mind. And then you also need to figure out how respondents are going to get the incentive and what that incentive will be. So if that is airtime, how that will be disbursed and the turnaround time for when that will get to the respondent, because again, that goes into your user experience and would affect your future engagement with the respondents if there's a challenge in that. And if you're using mobile money, again, you need to figure out what platform you're using and how that will get to respondents. So as an example, if you're in a country that has 3 mobile network operators and you only have connectivity to 1 mobile network operator in terms of mobile money disbursement, then you need to figure out how you would disburse money across across multiple networks in that particular case. Lastly, we are cognizant that what you've talked about here has been two-way mobile SMS as a methodology, but we're also cognizant of the fact that out there, people have utilized USSD as an approach to conduct mobile SMS surveys, but you need to keep in mind that it has a lot of drop-off rates and also can have limitations in terms of question structure. So do keep that in mind when you are looking to deploy mobile SMS as not a two-way, but utilizing USSD. That brings us to the end of our presentation. So I'll pause there and open the space for any questions from the audience as I pass the mic to Ali and Chess.
Excellent. John, Charles, thank you both very much. I wonder if you might, and I apologize, there was a method you just mentioned in the previous slide. If you could give us a little clarification on what that is?
On USSD?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, JP, do you want to go through that?
So mobile SMS, two-way mobile SMS, as I mentioned, is where you have one text goes out and another text comes in as a response, and that iteration goes on for the rest of the survey. Mobile USSD, the way it would work is you would dial in a short code, and then you would get a pop-up back. Then that pop-up will be on your screen, and you'll have to put in a response while being still on the same screen, and that iteration will continue for as long as you are engaging that USSD shortcode. If you drop off, then you'll have to start afresh. But mobile SMS, you can text in, text back for as long as you want. So that is the big difference between USSD and two-way mobile SMS.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so very much. I would encourage anyone here to put a question into the Q&A, and we will work to answer them. And I see Charles has already gotten to informed consent. We had some questions around informed consent. The slides will be posted on the WAPOR website, and all of our webinars are made available on YouTube. Give us a little bit of time to get things formatted, but they should be on YouTube as well. And we encourage you to go back and see some of our other webinars if they're of topics of interest to you. I apologize that we can't at this time have captioned or subtitled in different languages videos on YouTube, but we'll hopefully someday find a way to get those sorts of barriers resolved. Any other questions? We have one on gender quotas and how are those managed in sort of reaction to non-response?
Yeah, I can take this one. Yeah, so the way these systems work is that you set up the targets that you'd like to obtain by different categories. Sometimes, it's like age times gender times location. So you might have as many like 60 individual cells you want to manage. If you get someone who is part of a closed quota, they're just not included. And you see that it really depends on the survey, but these quotas truly this method is really needed because in a lot of surveys, like you might get 4 men for every 1 woman who responds, just as an example. So that's important for that as well. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question though.
If there's more clarification, please put it in the chats. Curious, as this is from John Honahan, curious about your thoughts. Do you see an advantage to SMS surveys over web surveys sent as links via SMS?
JP, do you want to take that and then I can follow up?
Yes. So I think the mobile web surveys sent as links via mobile text is something that has taken root in the continent, but it has serious challenges around representation because of internet penetration rates across different countries. So you'll find countries, say, for instance, as an example, in Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, for instance, would have higher internet penetration rates compared to, say, Sudan or, say, Eritrea as an example. So representation becomes an issue. Secondly is also the availability of internet-enabled devices. So even in the countries where you have a lot of internet penetration, the access to internet-enabled devices I think the highest you'll find is probably about 60% of the population in this particular country. So that becomes another challenge. And then also you have the challenge of data. So when you're administering surveys via web for mobile phone, you need to make sure that you're also able to compensate the respondent on the data that they will use when they are doing the interviews. But it has advantages in the sense of you're able to run longer questions. You're able to show images, show video, play audio. So the capabilities around them, in terms of even the question structure, you're able to have matrix questions, longer text questions. So there are advantages, but the drawbacks are also there for you to consider depending on the survey that you're designing.
Excellent, thank you. I see we have a hand from Brad Youngblood. Is that a question you're?
Jace?
Yes.
There is a question in the chat. How do you manage to acquire consent, and what are the challenges?
I can take this one. So, so informed consent is first of all required for any survey. I think that goes without saying, but important to emphasize here. In a phone survey, consent is handled verbally. So in CATI, it's verbal. In SMS, it's handled by just pressing usually 1 to agree to continue. One of the main challenges with consent in these methods is it's not unique to Africa or other regions. It's a challenge in any phone survey. Is consent needs to be shorter than a face-to-face survey. This is true in any country in the world, and so it's important to given that you're not in person, you need to convey the key points of the consent in a way that respondents will actually understand, and in a way that interviewers will actually read. Some of the best parts of interviewer training are having interviewers actually read the consent, and it's also quite important to actually check that interviewers are reading it during the QC process as well. The key parts of the consent are similar as in face-to-face surveys. And I would say in regards to SMS, all this applies to both modes, but SMS is even more challenging because of the character limits. A lot of SMSs do provide an opportunity the respondent can type something like help or more info to be able to get more information that's texted to them, and also a web link too.
Thank you. We have a question, and this is pertaining to some of the sensitive questions, which have the challenge of somebody maybe giving a sensitive answer and it's still on their phone. This is from Remy Dijon. Is there an automatic way to delete the discussion at the end of an SMS survey?
No, so the SMSs remain on people's phones. So that's why I think JP mentioned this in his remarks, that you need to be really careful about this. So if you have a survey on gender-based violence or something, SMS is probably not the mode for you, because the responses remain on the phone. So there are some important questions around privacy there. The whole issue of sensitivity is a really interesting and important area that's woefully under-researched in these areas too. So generally, the literature shows that self-administered modes produce higher quality data because people don't have an interviewer to kind of impress or like hide things from or appear better. But on the other hand, people take surveys, especially in SSA, in the context of other people around. Sometimes people use speakerphones. So the issue of sensitive topics in CATI surveys is a really important one that needs a lot more attention.
I wanted to add something with regards to respondent consent, and just 2 quick points. Number one is that there are 2 ways you need to handle consent. Number one is, as the respondent you're onboarding respondents into your database, you need to make sure that there's consent for the respondent to be in your database. And then the time or the point where you're executing the survey, then you also need to make sure that respondents give consent before they continue with the survey. a second point that I wanted to put across is that as a result of data protection laws that are actually being enacted in different countries in the continent, there have been additional regulations that have come in with regards to SMS surveys in various countries in the continent. As an example, for Kenya, currently we have regulations that dictate how many times you can prompt a respondent after the initial SMS blast has gone to the respondent. We are limited by the number of times that you can, remind the respondent to take a survey. And then also we are limited by the number of times you can prompt a respondent to take a survey if the database does not belong to you. So what I mean here is that, for instance, if I'm running an SMS survey for an organization X that has a beneficiary list, according to the regulations that are there at the moment, I can only send one blast and I cannot send another reminder to the same pool of respondents because these are not from my database as an organization. So those are just parameters that would vary from country to country that you need to keep in mind when you're executing mobile SMS surveys in conformity with the current or the recent data protection laws that are coming in the continent.
And so speaking a little bit about the variability, we have a question, and perhaps we could think of this both in terms of Sub-Saharan Africa and globally, if we might. But in how many countries have you already implemented these survey methods? What about the sample coverage? Is it national or is it just in some limited areas?
Good question there, Chess. Yes, I don't have the direct numbers in terms of the countries where I've done SMS surveys, but they're well over 40. And there's been a combination of both nationally representative studies and studies that are very targeted. So you may have, organizations that are looking to speak to, youths in a particular city. So just getting feedback for, quick feedback amongst the youth. And you may also have cases where you have to do a national representative study on a particular topic across different demographics. So it's a combination of both. And the countries where we have done this work is well over 40. And we have been doing mobile SMS work in Africa from 2012. So it's something that has been done for quite some time now.
Excellent, thank you. Is this Eric Ileng has a hand?
Yes.
And is
Eric,
this
go ahead. Eric?
I think it's Joseph. I don't know if it's from me.
The hand, is there
Eric is from Cameroon.
Yes, it's from Cameroon. A couple of us from Cameroon as well. But it's Joko from my end. It's Joseph here.
So do you have a question?
Yeah, yes, I have a question. I'm just curious about how do we, can you please share with us how you handle social class bias? Because for instance in Africa, there are some regions where we have people not educated. So how do we handle that?
Thanks, it's a great question. I'll answer it on two levels. One is on the sampling level. So if you don't have a quota-based control in your survey, you're likely to get a sample that dramatically underrepresents lower status or class or income people. So it's most surveys will use this quota-based design that I mentioned earlier. Second thing to mention is testing, questionnaire development and testing. Most questionnaires, especially if they're if the researchers are based outside of the country, need to be carefully adapted.
Did we just lose Charles? Okay. And we are getting close to
I have a question. Oh. Hello.
Hi, everyone. I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
Sorry, it's been 4 years since the pandemic, and I've never had my computer die on me during a presentation. But I guess there's a first time for everything. So my computer just froze up on me. So I'm joining from my phone. So to carry on what I was saying, another critical part is testing the questionnaire to make sure that people of all different education levels can participate and understand the questions. Time and time again, oftentimes clients will come with questions that are overly complicated, cognitively burdensome, that are hard for everyday people to understand. Oftentimes the questionnaire development process is, squeezed during the project timelines. So I would encourage everyone to really talk about the importance of testing, using cognitive testing, doing expert reviews, doing pilot tests to really make sure that the questions, including the translations, can be understood by everyone. This is an issue that doesn't get enough attention, in part because it's hard to measure. Some of the measurement errors that can come out by less educated people from our surveys, but just because it's hard to measure doesn't mean we shouldn't care a lot about it. So that's something to really focus on. And
Ali, did you have a question? Maybe one final question for the panel?
Thank you very much, Charles and John, for exciting presentation with very objective and honest situation. The question is that we know there is a big challenge with the literacy in our regions, and add to that, in some part of Africa, we have a lot of languages. And if you do CATI, you have to have a lot of people speaking different languages in the studio. So, but I can see that through that, there is a way to combine the two methodology, the CATI and SMS, in order to achieve some national representative sampling in a survey where we don't have a larger questionnaire. How about that? Have you ever thought about that?
I've thought about it, but I've never done it. So let's do it, Ali. Let's do it. Let's talk later.
Okay.
This is great. We're putting together research projects as we speak. I just first of all want to give just a huge thank you to John and to Charles for taking the time and sharing all of this with us. It was super interesting and excellent, and we really appreciate it. I also want to thank Angela for giving us this great introduction and context to WAPOR Sub-Saharan Africa. I want to put in a little plug that I believe the current plan is for our international 2027 conference to be held in Nairobi. So we hope that is able to work out so that we can all sort of learn from the wonderful things going on in Sub-Saharan Africa. I also just really want to thank Ali for his great work on the committee and putting together this wonderful talk. I want to thank all of you WAPOR members and non-members for joining us. If you found this interesting, we'd encourage you to join WAPOR or join one of our regional chapters or join both. This is something that we really just please join. And if you have any feedback on translations, because this is a new thing for us, please send us an email if you noted either things working well or things not working well. We'll do our best to try to keep doing this to make things available all around. So thank you all very much.